Every time someone asks an AI a question, something physical happens in Northern Virginia. Electricity moves through high-voltage lines. Cooling systems push heat out of enormous buildings. Processors worth thousands of dollars perform billions of calculations. And somewhere outside Washington, a county earns another small fraction of the tax revenue generated by the largest concentration of data centers on Earth. This is Data Center Alley, a section of Northern Virginia where hundreds of anonymous, heavily secured buildings process an extraordinary share of the world's digital activity. Much of the internet passes through this region. Cloud services, financial transactions, government systems, streaming platforms, and increasingly artificial intelligence all depend on machines operating here. From the outside, the buildings are not especially impressive. Most look like enormous warehouses surrounded by fences, cameras, electrical equipment, and backup generators. But economically, they are unlike almost anything built before. They can cost billions of dollars, use as much electricity as a city, generate extraordinary tax revenue, and operate with remarkably few people. For years, Loudoun County appeared to have discovered the perfect business. Data centers occupied relatively little land, placed few children in local schools, created limited traffic, and produced hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. Residents received better public services while property tax rates fell. Every new server installed inside one of these buildings expanded the county's tax base without demanding the services normally associated with population growth. It looked like free money, but artificial intelligence is now testing that model at a scale no one originally planned for. Data centers are becoming larger, more power-intensive, and more geographically aggressive. What began as a profitable local industry is turning into a national competition for electricity, land, water, and political permission. And the most important thing almost no one realizes is that an AI data center does not behave like the factory politicians compare it to. A factory turns capital into products by organizing large numbers of workers and suppliers. An AI data center turns electricity into computation using machines specifically designed to minimize human involvement. The building may be worth more than an automobile plant, but the servers inside it are effectively the workforce. That difference changes almost everything about who benefits from the AI investment boom. Northern Virginia did not become the world's data center capital because someone designed it that way. The industry grew from a series of advantages that reinforced one another. The region is close to Washington, major corporations, defense contractors, and a large concentration of internet users. It has access to extensive fiber optic infrastructure because some of the earliest commercial internet exchange points were established there. It also had reliable electricity, available land, favorable government policy, and local officials who recognized that computer equipment could become an unusually valuable source of tax revenue. Once the first large facilities arrived, the location became even more attractive. New fiber routes were installed, utilities expanded connections, contractors developed specialized expertise, technology companies knew they could find land, power, permits, and experienced workers in the same market. Economists call this agglomeration. Once an industry reaches sufficient scale in one location, every company that arrives makes the location more valuable to the next. Silicon Valley did this with software and venture capital. Detroit did it with automobiles. Northern Virginia did it with data centers. Today, the region contains roughly 13% of reported data center capacity worldwide and about 1/4 of the capacity in the Americas. Around 80% of Virginia's data center industry is concentrated in only 3 counties: Loudoun, Prince William, and Fairfax. Loudoun alone represents approximately half of the state's sites, building space, and estimated data center electricity use. This concentration has produced extraordinary financial results. Data centers generate almost half of Loudoun County's property tax revenue. They occupy only a small fraction of the county's commercial parcels, but provide an enormous share of its public budget. For every dollar the county spends providing services to data centers, it says it receives approximately $26 in tax revenue. That is an incredible ratio. A residential neighborhood requires roads, schools, parks, emergency services, and public employees. A shopping district creates traffic and needs extensive local infrastructure. A conventional factory employs many people whose families use public services. A data center needs electricity, security, fiber connectivity, and emergency response, but relatively little from many other county departments. It does not send children to school. It does not produce morning traffic comparable to a corporate office. It does not require public parks. It silently generates tax revenue, while most residents barely interact with it. This allowed Loudoun County to expand services and reduce tax pressure on homeowners. Without the data center industry, officials estimate that the real estate tax rate would be substantially higher. Revenue from servers has helped fund schools, local services, and reductions in other taxes. If the story ended there, data centers might be considered one of the most successful local economic development strategies in America. But there is a catch. Loudoun did not simply attract an industry, it built a growing portion of its public finances around one. When almost half of a county's property tax revenue comes from data centers, those buildings are no longer just businesses. They become a structural part of government funding. Schools, salaries, services, and tax reductions begin to depend on companies continuing to install valuable equipment. Computer hardware depreciates quickly. Processors that are extremely valuable today can become commercially obsolete within several years. Tax revenue therefore depends not only on facilities remaining open, but on operators continuing to replace old machines with newer and more expensive ones. For now, artificial intelligence makes that seem likely. Technology companies are racing to acquire the newest chips, and demand for computing capacity continues to grow. But dependence becomes visible when circumstances change. If new facilities move elsewhere, hardware spending slows, tax rules change, or AI investment fails to meet expectations, the county could face a sudden financial gap. Loudoun has already created a revenue stabilization fund partly to protect its budget from fluctuations in data center taxes. That is the behavior of a government that understands both the value and the risk of its most important customer. The employment numbers reveal another imbalance. Virginia's data center industry contributes significantly to the state economy. An official state analysis estimated approximately 74,000 jobs, $5.5 billion in labor income, and $9.1 billion in annual economic output connected to the industry. Those numbers sound like proof of an employment revolution. But most of the impact comes from construction. Of the estimated 74,000 jobs, around 59,000 were associated with building facilities and their wider economic effects. Only about 15,000 were connected to ongoing operations, and just 4,400 of those were direct operational jobs at the data centers themselves. This does not make the construction work imaginary. Tens of thousands of electricians, engineers, equipment installers, concrete workers, and suppliers receive real income from these projects. At the height of construction, a large facility may have around 1,500 people working on site, but a construction boom must keep expanding to maintain its economic impact. When one building is finished, the workers need another project. The local economy becomes dependent not simply on operating data centers, but on continuously building more of them. That is very different from a factory employing thousands of people for several decades. Imagine two projects costing $5 billion. One is an advanced manufacturing plant. It needs production workers, engineers, maintenance teams, logistics operations, managers, inspectors, and a network of suppliers. Those employees receive salaries and spend them in the local economy. The other project is an AI data center. Most of its value may be concentrated in processors, servers, cooling equipment, electrical systems, and networking hardware. Once operational, automation allows the facility to function with a small technical staff. Both projects count as $5 billion of investment, but the number says almost nothing about how many households will receive income from them. This is the central illusion of the AI infrastructure boom. Capital investment and local prosperity are not the same thing. $1 billion spent on salaries, local suppliers, and long-term production can circulate through a regional economy many times. $1 billion spent on processors manufactured somewhere else creates value for the company that owns those machines, but only a fraction of that spending remains in the community hosting them. In Virginia, computer equipment represented more than 2/3 of the initial capital spending reported by data centers receiving tax exemptions. The economic benefits are real, but they are not proportional to the spectacular number announced at a press conference. The larger problem is that AI is changing the industry's demand for electricity. Virginia's data centers already require roughly 5,000 megawatts of power, an amount comparable to the electricity needs of approximately 2 million Virginia households. They operate continuously, and their customers expect near-perfect reliability. A brief interruption can disrupt services used by companies and governments around the world. Traditional cloud facilities were already significant electricity consumers. AI makes them far more demanding because advanced processors are exceptionally power-intensive. Training a large model requires thousands of specialized chips operating together. Serving that model to millions of users creates continuous demand after training is complete. As models become more capable, companies are using them for longer reasoning processes, video generation, scientific simulation, software development, and autonomous agents. Individual chips are becoming more efficient, but total consumption can still rise because companies install more chips and use them more frequently. This is known as the rebound effect. When a technology becomes cheaper or more efficient, people often consume more of it. Efficiency reduces the cost of each unit while expanding the number of units demanded. The result is that the geography of AI may be determined less by software talent than by access to electricity. For years, a technology company could scale a digital product without thinking like a heavy industrial corporation. Software was attractive because the cost of serving the next customer was extremely low. AI changes that equation. The next million users may require another cluster of processors, another cooling system, another substation, and eventually another power plant. Northern Virginia is now confronting the physical limits of digital growth. New transmission lines are being proposed because existing infrastructure cannot indefinitely absorb the industry's expansion. Utilities must plan years ahead, estimating how many data centers will actually be built and how much electricity each one will require. If they underestimate demand, projects may be delayed and reliability may suffer. If they overestimate it, billions of dollars in unnecessary infrastructure can be left behind. That second risk is rarely discussed. An AI company can announce a massive data center campus, reserve electrical capacity, and later change its plans. Perhaps a new generation of chips requires less energy. Perhaps the company moves investment to another state. Perhaps the market for AI services grows more slowly than expected. Perhaps several proposed facilities never advance beyond planning. The utility may still have constructed transmission lines or generation capacity based on those forecasts. Those assets cannot easily be returned for a refund. If the large customer disappears, the costs may remain in the electrical system for decades. Private companies can change strategy quickly. Public infrastructure cannot. Virginia's own analysis warned that data center growth could cause generation and transmission infrastructure to be overbuilt, potentially leaving broader groups of customers responsible for stranded costs. Even under slower growth scenarios, the state may need enormous investments in power generation and transmission. This creates a complicated economic result. Data centers can generate exceptional local tax revenue while simultaneously creating regional infrastructure costs that appear elsewhere in the system. A county may receive the taxes. A utility may build the grid. Ratepayers across a much larger area may help finance it. State officials may grant the tax exemption. A neighboring community may host the transmission line. A rural county may host the new power plant. The benefits and costs do not necessarily appear in the same place. This is why debates about whether data centers are good or bad often produce contradictory answers. In Loudoun County, the fiscal benefits are obvious. In a community receiving a new high-voltage transmission corridor but little tax revenue, the calculation may look entirely different. The noise provides another example. A data center is not silent. Cooling systems, electrical equipment, and backup generators can create a continuous low-frequency hum. Unlike ordinary urban noise, it may persist throughout the day and night. Residents living near facilities have described difficulty sleeping and enjoying their homes, while operators argue that projects comply with existing noise rules. Both statements can be true. Traditional noise ordinances were not necessarily designed for enormous industrial cooling systems operating continuously. Measuring average volume may fail to capture the low-frequency characteristics residents find most disturbing. The conflict exposes a broader regulatory problem. Communities are approving facilities unlike anything their zoning codes were written to handle. A building may be classified as a warehouse or light industrial use even though its electricity demand resembles that of a major industrial plant. Water use creates similar confusion. Some data centers rely heavily on water for cooling, while others use different systems or recycle water through closed loops. Consumption varies by technology, climate, and operating conditions. Companies can accurately claim that a particular facility uses relatively little water while the industry's total demand still becomes significant as hundreds of facilities are built. And once again, the impact depends on location. Water use that is manageable in one region may become politically explosive in another. National averages conceal local scarcity. So why do governments continue offering tax incentives to attract these projects? Because the companies can credibly threaten to go somewhere else. More than 30 states offer some form of sales tax exemption for data centers, and several states impose no sales tax at all. A modern facility purchases billions of dollars in computer equipment. Exempting that equipment from sales tax can therefore be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. No state wants to be the first to withdraw an incentive if neighboring states maintain theirs. This creates a classic race between governments. Each location would prefer to collect more revenue, but each fears losing the entire investment by demanding it. Virginia's exemption has been central to the industry's growth. To qualify under the standard rules, a company must generally make a major capital investment, create a minimum number of jobs, and meet wage requirements. But the contrast between those thresholds is revealing. A qualifying project may involve at least $150 million in investment while requiring only 50 new jobs. In economically distressed areas, the employment threshold can fall to 10. The policy is not really buying employment, it is buying capital investment and hoping that the wider economic effects justify the lost tax revenue. In Loudoun, this strategy has worked better than it has in many other places because the county taxes data center equipment locally and has accumulated an enormous cluster. The industry generates substantial net revenue while demanding relatively few public services. But most communities cannot recreate Loudoun's history simply by approving one facility. They may receive fewer projects, weaker bargaining power, less valuable equipment, or different tax arrangements. They may absorb the land and infrastructure costs without ever achieving the concentration that made Data Center Alley so profitable. This is the danger of copying a successful economic model after the conditions that created it have changed. Northern Virginia became dominant before AI triggered the current rush for power. It developed fiber networks, specialized contractors, utility relationships, and a deep market over many years. A rural county offering tax breaks today may be entering the market when electricity is scarcer, public resistance is stronger, and the facilities require even more infrastructure. What worked for the first major hub may not work for the 100th community attempting to imitate it. There is also a national argument for building these facilities regardless of local employment. Artificial intelligence is becoming strategically important to research, defense, medicine, finance, and industrial competitiveness. A country without sufficient computing capacity could become dependent on infrastructure controlled by foreign governments or companies. From that perspective, judging data centers only by permanent jobs misses their larger value. The United States does not build ports, electrical grids, or military facilities solely because they employ many people. It builds them because they support the wider economy and national power. AI data centers may belong in that category. They are critical infrastructure rather than conventional employment projects. But if that is true, governments should stop selling them to communities as job factories. They should describe them honestly as capital-intensive infrastructure that can generate tax revenue, strengthen national computing capacity, support construction employment, and place significant demands on electricity systems. That framing produces better policy. Utilities can require large customers to make binding financial commitments before expensive infrastructure is built. Contracts can ensure that households are protected if projects are canceled. Tax incentives can depend on measurable benefits rather than announcement numbers. Communities can require transparent reporting of energy and water use. Noise modeling can happen before construction instead of after residents begin complaining. Local governments can create stabilization funds rather than spending every dollar of volatile equipment revenue as if it were permanent. Most importantly, states can separate two questions that are usually treated as one. Is the data center valuable to the national economy? And is this particular agreement valuable to the community hosting it? The answer to the first question may be yes, while the answer to the second is no. A project can strengthen America's position in artificial intelligence while giving away too much tax revenue locally. It can create valuable infrastructure while shifting unreasonable costs onto ratepayers. It can generate billions in economic activity while producing very few permanent jobs. Economic value does not disappear simply because it is unevenly distributed. But distribution determines whether communities view the AI boom as progress or extraction. This is what makes Northern Virginia so important. It shows the strongest possible version of the data center promise. Loudoun County did receive enormous revenue. Its residents did benefit from lower property tax rates and improved services. The industry did support thousands of construction jobs and billions of dollars in economic output. And even there, the model is reaching uncomfortable limits. The county depends heavily on a volatile source of revenue. The state faces enormous electricity requirements. New transmission infrastructure is spreading across the region. Residents are challenging noise, land use, and the visual impact of industrial development. The industry's permanent workforce remains small compared with the value of the machines it operates. If these tensions exist in the most successful data center market in the world, communities offering incentives to become the next one should pay close attention. The artificial intelligence revolution is often described as though it exists inside software, but its most important constraints are increasingly physical. AI needs processors, and processors need factories. Data centers need electricity, and electricity needs power plants and transmission lines. Cooling systems need water or energy-intensive alternatives. Every facility needs land and permission from a community. The cloud is becoming heavy industry. But unlike the industrial revolutions of the past, this one may not bring large numbers of workers into the factory. The factory is filled with machines performing the work, and the product leaves through fiber optic cables without ever passing through the local economy. That does not mean AI data centers create no prosperity. It means prosperity will not appear automatically wherever they are built. It depends on who owns the machines, who sells the electricity, who collects the taxes, who pays for the infrastructure, and whether the community has enough bargaining power to keep a reasonable share of the value it helps create. Every AI answer seems instant, invisible, and almost free. Northern Virginia reveals what is hiding behind that illusion: billions of dollars in hardware, thousands of megawatts of electricity, miles of transmission infrastructure, and a political negotiation over who benefits. Data centers may be the factories of the future, but they are factories where the workers are processors, the raw material is electricity, and the finished product can leave the community at the speed of light. Loudoun County found a way to tax those machines and became extraordinarily wealthy from them. Now the rest of the country is trying to reproduce that success without knowing whether it is copying the opportunity or only the cost. And that may be the most important economic question of the AI boom. Not whether artificial intelligence will create value. It almost certainly will. But whether the places providing the land, power, water, and infrastructure will capture enough of that value to call what follows prosperity.